Welcome to In Their 20s, a podcast created for people in their 20s. Today we spoke with Dan Michelson, who is the CEO of Strata Decision Technology, a performance platform used by over 1,000 healthcare organizations, including many of the largest and most influential healthcare systems in the US. With close to 30 years of healthcare experience, Dan has been one of the industry's key thought leaders. There is so much advice in this interview with Dan. Really excited to share it. So let's hop in with Dan to hear about his best advice for people in their 20s.
Kudos to you for doing this. It says a lot about you that you're investing your time and trying to help out, people around you, because I think a lot of people in their 20s are looking for and in need of advice.
100%. No, this journey has been so just gratifying, amazing. I've learned so much personally. I mean, yes, I'm doing this for other people, but also for myself. I get access to the best advice from the best people like you. So it's not, it's really, it's just a great experience for me.
You're gonna be on advice overload.
Yeah, exactly. We can go ahead and get started. I understand you have close to 30 years of experience within healthcare. You've done so much within this industry. We're going to be, and I'll just kind of break down the interview and how I really envision this going. I'm going to want to begin by talking about your early days, in college. Of course, these three big jobs with Baxter, Allscripts, and now Strata Decision Technology, and just your general advice, best practices for 20-somethings. You earned a BS in finance from Indiana University, and of course your MBA from DePaul University. A lot of people, they're in school now and they're curious. They're really wondering, okay, the skills that I gained today in the classroom, will I be using those 20, 30, in the future for the rest of my career? So I'd love to break down some of your favorite classes, the skills you gained at Indiana and DePaul when you did return for your MBA later down the line, and just, full transparency. Do you still use what you learned in the classroom today?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, Landy, I wanted to thank you for hosting this and including me, because this is a great topic and a fun topic and a really relevant one. Let's do the let's begin with the punchline. Definitely, maybe would be my answer. So I think the mistake people make is thinking that they're going for vocational training, when really what they're trying to do, hopefully, if it works out well, is grow.
Mm-hmm.
And that growth is a continuous process throughout your life if you do it right. If you look at the research behind people who are retired, for lack of a better term, are they happy or are they not? And often, if they're not, it's because they've lost that meaning in their life, and work has so much meaning. So what's the lesson you can take from that is your work should be meaningful. So if you kind of go back to your time in class, you're sort of taking advice from a lot of people, and and your inputs may be a movie that you watched, so therefore you want to work for a tech company because you saw Social Network, or maybe you want to work on Wall Street because you saw the movie Wall Street back in the 80s, if that was the time when you graduated. So it's kind of a little bit not as programmed as people may want to believe. And careers, it turns out, are not very linear. So the answer is, yeah, I mean, there's certain classes that I took that really stuck with me, but it may not be what you expected. So in undergrad, I remember taking a class in finance, and I was actually not that interested in going into finance. The reason why I was a finance major is because some other things came naturally to me. So I thought the stretch would be, getting that finance skill set. So a lot of the classes I took, I actually wasn't totally in love with. But there was one class, an advanced finance class, where all the examples were sports examples. And I was really into sports, and those really resonated with me. And, what you learn is that education only really resonates when you're interested in something, or that something is interested in you. So what I mean by that is there's teachers who've taken an interest in me, and those teachers were game changers for me. So even if the topic itself wasn't as relevant, like the history of rock and roll class I took, the fact that Glenn Gass at Indiana taught that with such enthusiasm taught me that if I'm going to get into a topic, I need to approach that with that same level of passion and energy and carry that forward to other people. So with healthcare, that may or may not be a fascinating topic, with everybody, but to me, my God, there's nothing more important. And so, seeing and being exposed to teachers like that, what you take from that is not the context of what they were teaching, but the way in which they were teaching it. And that's a skill that you can move forward into the rest of your life. At at DePaul, the game changer was a guy named Joel Whalen.
Mm-hmm.
So I had kind of gone through life as a pretty insecure, pretty insular, pretty introverted guy. So I had a pretty tough time growing up, went through a lot from a family perspective. My parents got divorced when I was very, very young, so 2 years old. I haven't seen my dad since I was 11.
Wow.
But luckily, I had somebody else come into my life who was my dad, became my dad versus my father. And, I learned a lot from him, but I didn't learn how to get out of my shell until I came across Joel Whalen. And so he taught a business communications course and really taught me how to think about communication very differently. But up until I was 25 and took that class, I was not comfortable not only on a podcast, but getting up in front of a group of 2 or 3 people just in a room and having a discussion with them. So I think there's life skills that you pick up, to your question,
Mm-hmm.
and then I think there's vocational skills, and I think there's not a lot that you're going to learn when you're 20 years old in terms of a formula that's going to help you when you're 40 years old. But thinking how to think, is a constant process, and I do think college and anything you do post-grad really helps you accelerate that.
Love that, Dan. Such a touching and just really open and honest story. On the subject of being open and honest, because I just want to extract some of the things that you said. It seems that during your college days and just early in your career, you put yourself in positions that maybe you weren't fully aware of what the outcome would be, or you tested the limits with just different classes or different environments. Do you think like that is something more 20-somethings need to do, where go into a situation, maybe you don't know for sure if you're going to like something or dislike something, but you just won't know until you try it out?
I think that's such a good point, Landon. The way that I describe it to people is it's like experiences are like marbles and you're putting them in a jar.
Hmm.
And the more marbles you put in that jar, the better off you are. So good experience, great. Bad experience, great. Just collect experiences. That doesn't mean you need to job hop per se. In a specific company, you can be pursuing all different kinds of opportunities. So and also then outside of work, you could be doing the same. So, you putting this podcast together is a great example of you putting marbles in a jar. And then every single person you talk to, it's more marbles in that jar. So you see people who are 25 or 30 years old, right? So midway through their 20s or at the end of their 20s, who are in totally, completely different places because they didn't pursue that type of growth, and that's not something that you have to obsess on. You just have to be conscious of it. So if someone's asking you to help, the answer should be always yes. If you have open cycles, you should always be offering up opportunities to help. And I think that if you adopt that mindset, you will accelerate your growth dramatically through your 20s. Yeah, and so I think that's kind of what I did. I came out of school. I had a job for a year selling copiers, which is a whole story in and of itself. But someone told me I needed sales experience at some point in my career, so I took the bait. And a year after doing that, I was completely miserable, right? And the job was okay, the money was fine, but I just didn't feel like my work mattered, and I didn't feel like I was going anywhere. So that's when I went back to grad school. I started running marathons because I just had that excess energy to want to do something. And over the next 3 years of running marathons and going to grad school, my growth just accelerated in terms of my confidence in myself and, kind of my ability to push myself into different things. But the big turning point for me was after a year of doing something I wasn't passionate about, didn't care about, didn't value. Instead of looking for my next job, I literally went shopping for a purpose. Like, what do I want to spend my time on? Now, what job do I want? And so I ended up interviewing a lot of people, on my own, kind of my own volition, just trying to, hey, what do you do? And how do you like it? And, or checking out different professions and trying to poke around in the mind of an architect, what do they do? And are they happy with it? And that's how I landed on healthcare. So instead of picking a profession, I picked a place where I thought I could make an impact. And that was about 30 years ago. And the track I've been down is just trying to find problems I think that matter within healthcare that I could spend my time on. So, that was the big turning point for me, was that whatever you call it, what color is your parachute or your rainbow, however you want to look at that, and thinking of that question in maybe a slightly different way than other people around me.
I love that. And Dan, just such an interesting career trajectory. Before we pivot and discuss Baxter, the first job that I want to discuss with you, you mentioned that you have a passion and very interested in sports, and also running. I believe you've completed over 17 marathons, so avid runner. So again, before we pivot to Baxter, I just want to talk a little bit about the impact that running and these marathons have had in your life, with your professional journey.
Yeah, it's really, in my case, freakishly important, right? So I was a very mediocre athlete. Like, I played a lot of sports. I
Yeah.
was like the first person there, last person to leave, the most likely person to, dive on the floor, or be stuck on the bench at the end of the game, right? I was all those things. And, when I started running, which I didn't do until I was about 22, 23 years old, I kind of found something that didn't have limits, and I found that really interesting. And to me, just being someone who had a lot of anxiety growing up and kind of dealing with all of that, it was a wonderful outlet for me.
Mhm.
So to me, it was more meditation and kind of a bit of a personal. No one can tell me whether I'm doing good or bad. I could be my own guide, on this. Like, you go up through school and you're constantly being graded. Someone's telling you whether you're smart or you're stupid.
Of course.
The world is a very objective place until you're 23 years old. And then you realize everything's subjective. And
Yeah.
you're like, whoa, I wish someone would have told me that. That would have been nice. So like I went out and ran 3 miles one day, 6 the next. Pretty soon I was running 12. And then a few months later, I ran my first, marathon, and, just did a little bit under 4 hours. And I was like, wow, to me, it was like the art of doing something you didn't think you were capable of. That exercise is a really important thing for people to go through, because it's not really that really other people set limits on us. We really set limits on ourselves for the most part. For the most part, other people really aren't paying attention to us. We think they are, but they're really not. So you're kind of, to some extent, stuck in your own world. And this helped me get beyond that in terms of my own limits. Then I went from 4 hours to 3 hours and 10 minutes to finishing the next marathon, the top 150 of everybody who ran the Chicago Marathon. And then I was off to run Boston Marathon, which was like the big thing that you have to qualify for. The kind of runner's goal is to run that race someday. And I went out and trained like crazy, and then collapsed after 25 miles because I was hypoglycemic and ended up in a medical tent. So totally crashed and burned, but learned a lot. I didn't think of it at that time this way, but I learned a lot from that experience, that kind of gave me even more grit, so, running teaches you, or any sport teaches you, that failure and success are intertwined. Those are just results, it's really more about the process.
Failure is super important, and can't stress that enough. You just are spitting so many amazing facts here. So I just love your points on failure and success being intertwined. I love your point on, we put limits on ourselves as well, and can really tell ourselves what we can and can't do. I think that's just so powerful, Dan. And I think it's the perfect transition now for our first conversation with Baxter, a company that actually rejected you 3 times before you began working with them. I think that's so powerful because, again, you would then end up working at this company. So many people in their 20s have to deal with rejection. It's terrible. I've been rejected from so many places. It's something that you got to get through. But please, let's talk about your experience at Baxter and also how you powered through the rejection.
Yeah, that's interesting. So yeah, the Baxter thing was 3 interviews on 3 different jobs over the course of 5 years. Thank God at the time they didn't have a good database to know that they wanted to take a pass on me, 3 other times before I interviewed the 4th time. But that was a company that was near where I grew up. And I just always had this image in my mind that I really wanted to someday work there. I'm sure most people don't even know the name of the company or couldn't figure out why it would matter to them, but it mattered to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got into healthcare after this job selling copiers and was working for a pharmaceutical company. I completed my MBA and I'm like, okay, now it's time to leverage this. And so, I did what a lot of MBAs do, went out and tried to get a job in consulting.
Mm-hmm.
So the rejection thing you'll see is a theme with me, because I actually interviewed with 9 consulting firms. I got rejected by all 9 of them.
Wow.
And then I finally got an offer with a consulting group within Baxter. And I'm like, I was sort of like, oh boy, they must have made a mistake here. So I showed up at work my first day, and it turns out they actually did hire me. And so I was pretty excited about that. And then I launched into a 7-year career there, of kind of just building and doing different things in and around the consulting group, then within one of their divisions, which was in medical supplies. So it was a kind of dig in time, I guess I would say, Landon. So you take your first job, you're sort of trying to figure out who you are,
Mm-hmm.
and what you're going to do. And I don't think many people necessarily stay within their first jobs, as I know So then you get on to that second job, right? And now you're like looking at how people around you evaluate you,
Mm-hmm.
and whether you can maybe even be a leader, to some extent. But by the time you get to the tail end of your 20s, you're like, I think it's time to dig in. I need to be someone who can make a difference, in and around kind of what I do. Otherwise, I'm not going to have much of a career. So then at that point, it's not just about the affirmation from others, it's really how you feel, and you become your own guide. And that was what was so important about that Baxter experience, was really getting an opportunity, to put my fingerprints on something. So they had a relatively small consulting group within Baxter. I came in as probably not the most likely candidate. I had a sales background.
Yeah.
I didn't have an MBA from one of your top 10 schools or 5 schools, as literally everybody there did. But within about a year and a half, 2 years, I was running half the consulting firm, half the country for that consulting firm. And what I learned from that experience is like, hey, I'm not as maybe quote smart in a traditional sense of some of those other folks. So what can I control? What is it that I can control? And I figured out it was basically 2 things. I could care more than anybody else, and I could try more than anyone else. That was a lesson from running, right? Once again, it's like focus on what you can control. Like, I'm not going to win a marathon, but how do I become better? How can I be the best version of myself, right? And so I can't worry about those around me, but what I can do is worry about myself. And so that was kind of my, for lack of better terms, superpower, was just how much I cared, and how hard I worked. And I don't just mean hours, I just mean working through things in a thoughtful way that are high impact. In your 20s, you're trying to figure out who you're going to be. You don't know who you're going to be. You don't even know who you are, right?
Yeah.
You kind of have a sense of it. And maybe you're the one person who's figured both those things out, and kudos to you. But for the most part, most people don't know those 2 things.
100%.
I think you're on a journey in your 20s to figure out those 2 things, to figure out who you are. And in your 30s, you're kind of, now it's time to be that person.
It's really learning your 20s, earning your 30s. I
think there's a lot of truth to that. I really do think so, right? Because you don't want to get too latched to something
100%.
That's appealing to you when you're 22 years old. That may not be long lasting for you. Like, I really did want to go into sports when I graduated. My dream job wasn't to sell copiers. It wasn't to be in healthcare. My dream job was working for Nike. That was the job I was going to get. I wrote a term paper on junior year in college. That was the job I was going to get. They just didn't know it, right? So I sent them 40. I didn't even take interviews coming out of college for the most part, because I was going to work at Nike. And this is 1990. That was the hot company at the time. I sent them 40 resumes, didn't get one response back. Once again, I told you rejection would be a theme here. So finally, in the 41st time, I got a response back. And the person said to me, well, everybody wants to work here. Your resume looks great, but you have a gap. And I'm like, okay, what's the gap? Well, you don't have any retail experience.
Mm.
And I'm like, okay, what do you mean by retail experience? And she's like, well, like working in a shoe store. I'm like, oh, so I can't get a job because I've never worked in a shoe store? Yeah. I'm like, okay, great. I'll work in a shoe store. So my first job out of college, my real first job out of college, is I went to Herman Sporting Goods and took a job in the shoe department, selling jobs
Wow.
for $2.75 an hour, because that was going to be my path to Nike. All my friends were getting their jobs and going on to be an accountant or, go to law school or whatever they were doing. And here I was making $2.75 saying, hey, let me try this on for you. Do you want to try a different color? And so after 2 months of that, and still Nike wasn't responding, to my passion for, working for them, I decided I was going to pack up my car and just drive to Oregon and show up there, and I'll be that story of the person who just showed up and got the job. And after 2 days of thinking about that, didn't pack up the car and decided to move on in my life. And that's how I started it on this other career path. So I'm just saying, like,
Amazing. Wow.
do I regret, not breaking through or being part of that? Not at all. Like, sports to me is fun. It's interesting. It's not how I wanted to spend my life.
Mm-hmm.
It was a fortunate accident that it didn't work out. So I think for the folks who are, in their 20s who are kind of listening in, it's like the bad things are good things. Like, if it doesn't work out, great, terrific. There's something to be learned from that, and you can leverage it in a whole different way, but you've got to learn to think of all of that as positive, and I think that's how you deal with the rejection, is you don't think of it as such.
I completely agree. And it's just so funny how like one little decision can, totally change your life too.
Well,
Um,
to an extent, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So we spoke about Baxter. Now I want to discuss Allscripts because, while you were at Baxter, of course, stable company, but you ended up leaving Baxter for Allscripts, which was quote unquote a struggling company at the time. It was losing, I believe, $18 million a quarter. And you read about it in the Chicago Tribune, found out about the position and the company. And you ended up working for Allscripts. While you were there, you grew up from 150 people to 6,000 people, from $27 million in revenue to $1.5 billion in revenue. A lot of people would have never taken a risk like that. What motivated you to leave Baxter, again, a company where you were doing fine, you loved the job, for Allscripts, a company that was struggling at the time, where you had no idea you'd be able to do all these amazing things?
Yeah, well, I mean, first, just so everybody understands, I didn't grow the company. It was a lot of people, and I was involved with it, which is, kind of a neat experience. But yeah, so I mean, just to paint the picture a little bit more clearly, just so everybody can understand, maybe one level down. So Baxter was about a $10 billion company at the time. Allscripts, like you said, a $27 million company. So and I would have had to take a pay cut to take the job, and my first child was about to be born. So I'm going to take a pay cut. I'm going to go to a company that's struggling, right? Do something I really don't know what I'm doing, right? Right when my first child's being born. And so the reason why I made the pivot ultimately is I was driving one day. I had to spend 2-3 months over analyzing this decision. And I asked myself, what advice would I give to my kid? And I would have told my kid to go for it.
Wow.
Because really what was happening at the time is I just saw the convergence of technology and healthcare as being inevitable, and I wanted to be part of that, So I literally, like you said, read that article, cold called, Allscripts to get the interview. And, to me, it was like, okay, well, this may work out, it may not, but it's going to be a learning experience either way.
Mm-hmm.
And I was totally safe, totally secure, totally stable at Baxter. It could have lasted for another 20 years. But I was also totally bored and totally not challenged and totally not growing. So I think what you really want, at least for me, what I take from that experience is growth equals growth. Like if you're challenged with something and it hurts and doesn't feel right, and you have a lot of anxiety about it, well, guess what? That's what growth feels like. It's exactly what it feels like. So the run at Allscripts was really this opportunity to transition healthcare from a paper-based industry into the electronic world, right? So first with electronic prescribing and e-prescriptions, and then with electronic health records. And so the experience was absolutely incredible, but we made a lot of mistakes along the way. Not everything went right or even close to it. I think, I learned a lot of what not to do, as well as what to do. So like the optics of it look great. Yeah, it grew a company from this to that. And sometimes people equate success with that type of growth.
Mhm.
I think I learned that actually it's more complicated than that. It's really comes down to two things. It's how do your customers feel about you,
Mhm.
and how does your team feel about you? If those two things are great, then it's a great company. Anything short of that, and it's not.
So powerful. And in your, personal view, how were the customers thinking about the product? And then also, how was your team thinking about the team?
Oh, well, I think we got to a point at that company where we made a lot of acquisitions along the way and pieced a
Hmm.
lot of different things together. And so the financial engineering, the growth of the company organically and then through acquisitions was actually really strong. But I think the customer and employee experience, very bumpy, very bumpy.
Got it. Yeah. Well, now the final position that I want to discuss with you is your current position at Strata Decision Technology, where you are helping to heal healthcare. So, pretty much for the listeners that do not fully understand what your company does, your performance platform, used by over 1,000 healthcare organizations, including many of the largest and most influential healthcare systems in the US. I'd love to give you the floor one more time and just hear about how you came into this position, what you've learned being a leader at this company, and what's next at Strata Decision Technology.
Yeah, well, let me make sure I get to all those questions. So if I forget any, let me know.
Of course.
But just real quick, so what Strata is and the way to think about it is, one of the biggest socioeconomic issues landed for your peer group that they'll face over the next 20, 30, 40 years is the cost of healthcare. So healthcare is the largest part of our GDP. It's 20% of our gross domestic product. $4 trillion a year is spent on healthcare, and about a trillion of that is considered wasted. So there's an enormous opportunity to make a difference. Strata really is the operating system
Hmm.
for understanding the cost of healthcare and doing something about it. That's what's really special about the company from a top line perspective. But the way I got into it is, an opportunity came my way to explore it. I had, you can tell this from some of my backstory, never really thought about running a company, never really had the confidence to do it, never um, thought I could run a company. And being a bit of a contrarian, that made me intrigued to at least explore it. And, as I kind of looked at it, it was another situation that was very similar to where I was at before with Baxter, which is like I was very stable, things were going well by many measures, but not necessarily challenged and not necessarily growing. And I saw that opportunity to get what I call an MBA in running a company
Hmm.
uh, to be pretty appealing. So I didn't know if it would work out or not. I had to take initially a pay cut to do it. And but I thought like, okay, this is how much it would cost me to get an MBA in the actual experience of running a company, and we'd see how it would go. So that was 9 years ago, and we've grown the company about 15-fold.
Wow.
During that time, it's been quite a journey. Right now, about half of U.S. healthcare runs on Strata. So we have an
Wow.
enormous presence. Everyone from you would know locally like Northwestern, University of Chicago, Advocate, the big healthcare delivery systems all across Illinois, to Kaiser Permanente, the largest healthcare system in
Wow.
the country, MD Anderson, the number one cancer center, Cleveland Clinic, the number one heart center. So they all run on Strata. So the company itself is in a very unique position when you talk about the future for what comes next for me is what comes next for Strata. I absolutely love my job. I feel lucky to have it. I tell people like there's only two things you need to think about from a career perspective to have a great career, just two, right? Find something you care about and work with people you care about. That's it. And once you found that, hold on to it because not that many people do. Not that many people do.
Hmm.
And a lot of people have one or the other. Like they have something they really care about, but they don't feel like they're part of a team or a company, or a group that really matters and respects each other. Or the others part of it, like part of a great team. They love the people they work with, but they're not really passionate. They don't really care about the work that they're actually doing and feel like it's meaningful in and of itself, enough to last throughout multiple decades of a career. So that's really what Strata is for me. So hopefully it's my last job. We'll see how that plays out over time. But the company really is sitting in a position where the data within healthcare is the thing that is the most valuable, the least understood, and the least accessible. So in healthcare, unlike other tech companies, in healthcare, what flows through our software is not bits and bytes, it's human lives. So the opportunity to put your fingerprints on something that really matters, and really affect how healthcare is delivered in this country is just incredibly intoxicating. And that's really, kind of where I spend my time and how I spend my time. So how many of your questions did I answer there? Did I come
No, I
close
think
to,
you're three
to
for
any of them?
I'm just so intrigued with what you guys are building at Strata. It sounds so interesting, and there are so many companies right now in the U.S. and unfortunately, a lot of these companies don't really bring, in my purview, like just true value to the marketplace, to the customers, to us, a citizen. And it's clear that what you guys are doing just is so important. It's so necessary, and it really is valuable. So it's just really powerful. I bet for you to wake up every single day knowing that you're really actually making a true difference to people that really need it.
Yeah, well, I think, listen, different people feel differently about quote work, right? But once again, it's like where we started this conversation. It's people who've gotten to the end of their career and how
Mhm.
they look back at their work and how they miss the meaning, once it's gone. So it really isn't about the work per se, it's about the meaning.
Of
And I
course.
think that's really where careers kind of come off the rails, is when it just becomes all about, a paycheck, or a promotion. And certainly that is undeniably important for many different reasons and many different points in people's careers. But it's an output. It's not an input. It's not enough in and of itself. So yeah, that's I guess my lens, that I'd share relative to that.
I love that. And Dan, now my final question for you. There were a few moments during our interview today when you mentioned that, you would have a new position and you'd have to take a pay cut in order to, fill out a new position. So I call that horizontal growth. A lot of people are always focused on vertical
Mm-hmm.
growth. So, what's next, or how can I make more money here?
Mm-hmm.
For a lot of people in their 20s, they don't want to take a pay cut. If I'm being frank,
Yeah.
a lot of people,
Yeah.
they don't see the full value of doing something like that. But
Yeah.
clearly, just looking at your career, I mean, it's paid off immensely. So I would just love to hear kind of your personal recipe for, like, when you were looking for horizontal growth, when you were looking to take a pay cut, how did you really find the answer for that? And what was your strategy before taking that step?
Yeah, and landed so it doesn't come off the wrong way. I wasn't looking to take a pay cut.
Oh,
That was just
God.
I'm not that altruistic.
Fair, fair.
It kind of happened that way. Listen, I mean, I guess this is the biggest challenge, to your personal mission for sharing information and advice for people in their 20s is like, do you believe in yourself or what everybody else is telling you,
Mhm.
And I think a lot of the narratives in life are just false narratives, right? And so, like, when you've been beat up a little bit, in your sub 20s, like I was, you learned, maybe, unfortunately, not to trust people quite as much.
Mhm.
And luckily for me, that trust has grown and been kind of reestablished, throughout the course of my life.
Of course.
But you also learn to question things, and maybe everybody isn't right about you, so, like, I think that a lot of people believe that people have formed or do form narratives about them as individuals, right? So, like, we get our haircut and we think people are observing it. We buy a new shirt and we think it, makes us look better, right? And so it's all in our head and it's all about us, right? So, like, when you think about a career, I'm not saying that people shouldn't focus on getting paid for the work that they do, and that's not an important output. But at the end of the day, let's just say someone's going to make $10,000 more at one company than the other. After taxes and deconstructing what that looks like on a biweekly basis,
Mhm.
and what you will actually do with that money, it's probably not going to make a bit of difference to them. So sometimes the tail is wagging the dog, is my only point. and you're looking at the wrong marker, for how to make those decisions. Now, when I made these decisions, was I thinking of, hey, what's the best thing for me long term from a compensation perspective? Absolutely. So when you say, like, man, it's worked out, well, it wasn't like I wasn't thinking about how it could potentially work out, right? Because, like, to me, healthcare was a great bet because this is an industry that is so messed up. It is so messed up. And the problems are so important, right? Because human lives are at stake. I could spend 30 years on that. So I was betting that if I was passionate about something, I would go deep. And if I went deep, I would be valuable. And if I was valuable, then I would get rewarded for that. That was the initial bet on healthcare. I absolutely was making that bet with how I can earn a living in mind. I wasn't just trying to save the world. I was trying to create a life for myself, right?
Of course, yeah.
So then when I came to Strata, I was absolutely thinking about, like, wait a minute, the cost of healthcare is one of the biggest problems we're facing as a society, you know? But when you think about getting a cup of coffee, you think about Starbucks. When you think about doing a search, you think of Google. If you think about getting a car, you think about Uber. When you think of cost of healthcare, who do you think about? Right? And so the answer to that question being, who knows? That's an enormous opportunity, right? So I absolutely saw this as, man, this could really be something. This might be not a 2-year run or a 5-year run. This could be a 10 or 20-year run of doing really meaningful work. And if you're doing meaningful work that's really valuable and you're contributing in a big way, you will get rewarded. Just bet on yourself, right? And that's really the lesson from that, is like, we're taught to think like, man, coming out of school, which jobs pay the most? Well, I can tell you one thing for sure without picking on anyone in particular. The people I know who knew exactly what they wanted to do in college and are still doing that today, you could fill in the profession. You could probably guess what those roles are the least happy people. Because they're the least challenged, they're the most bored, and they're doing it mostly just for the money, at this point, right? And what does that teach you, right? It teaches you, I don't know that you need to find your passion, right? I don't know if I believe in that, because I think passions are transient and they should be. But I do think you need to find your purpose. I do think you need to play the game with a sense of purpose. And those that do, you could just feel it. It's like that history of rock and roll teacher, Glenn Gass. I told you, like, you asked me about one class at Indiana. That's the first one that popped to mind. And it had nothing to do with my major, but it had everything to do with playing with a sense of purpose. Joe Whalen at DePaul, everything to do with playing with a sense of purpose. He cared about me. He took an interest in me. He knew why he was teaching that class. So if you take two people and you say, go be a teacher at Indiana, are you happy or sad? Go be a teacher at DePaul, are you happy or sad? I can tell you, some people love it. Some people love it. Some people like it. Some people hate it. They're probably making the exact same amount of money, but they view what they're doing totally, completely different. And that perspective is really the secret weapon, ultimately, that anybody could have at any point in their career. And you could feel that when you talk to people. You can tell if somebody certainly cares. I think there's a saying we use, I've stolen from other people who've stolen it from other people, is, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Wow. And that lesson is there, and it's rigid. It's not malleable. But throughout your life, if people are caring people, and those people tend to have very fulfilling careers.
Dan, you are so inspirational. Within this episode, you've shared so many marbles. I'm just so excited for our audience to really just dive in, decode everything that you said, because I'm really inspired, and I know our audience is going to really love this episode. I clearly see just how, just in love you are with what you're doing. I totally agree that you need to fight to find purpose over passion a lot of times. You really need to find your true purpose in life. I use a philosophy called Ikigai. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's called Ikigai. It's a Japanese philosophy, which has helped me kind of find my purpose.
Yeah.
It's this Venn diagram with 4 circles. And it pretty much says if you're able to do these 4 things, you'll find purpose. It is do something that you love, do something that the world needs, do something that you're good at, and do something that you can get paid for. So pretty much, yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, I've used that. And I do just agree with just your philosophy on life. You do need to fight to find your purpose. So again, that was just so powerful, and just thank you so much, Dan.
Yeah, absolutely. No, appreciate the opportunity, Landon. We'll be talking.
Of course, yeah. I'm so just glad also that you reached out as well. Like it really does mean a lot to me, Dan. And just thank you for taking time after a work day to speak with me on the show and just really inspire 20 somethings.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say, just kind of fun, is my son started working this week.
Wow. Well, first
Yeah,
job out of college or
internship, first
wow.
internship.
Okay, wow.
And so he's 2 days in. He's working really hard. And then I asked him what he had to do, what he did during the day, and he said, I was doing this, and then I had to do this, I had to do this, I had to do this. And he was pretty worn out. And I would say, hey, the only thing I would say to you is just reframe that just slightly. And I'm not trying to be Mr. Inspirational,
Yeah, yeah.
and I don't do that much coaching yet. I'm his dad, but there's like, it just kind of caught me for a second. And I'm like, I think I need to lean in on this one a little bit. Just think of I get to versus I have to. And I think that is, if you look at jobs that way, especially in your 20s, you're less transactional as a person. And I think sometimes people fall into that trap in their 20s where they're thinking like, okay, I went to college, now I get this job, right? Now I have to do this work.
Mm-hmm.
No, you were lucky to get the job. You should feel that every day when you go to work. And you may not be working there forever, but if you feel that way, you'll look at it differently.
Mm-hmm.
And then just think if I get to versus I have to, you'll approach it every day a little bit differently.
Wow. That's really
So
powerful. Thank you for
yeah.
sharing that. And please send my best wishes to your son as well. It's so exciting. I remember when I started my first internship, and hopefully he has many more internships to come, and has awesome experience at the company.
Yeah, you had 10 internships. I remember reading that
Yeah.
about you. You're the internship king.
I am.
So
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm a big
you-
advocate for just experience, and I think companies hire storytellers, and the only ways to create awesome stories are, through experience. So you got to learn in your 20s. You got to try things, and yeah, I've just really learned a lot myself from surrounding myself with unique people and these unique companies.
cool. Well, hey, great talking to you, Landon. Appreciate the
Yeah.
time.
And thank you again. Enjoy your evening.
Okay, you too. Take care. Bye bye.